Hey everybody, it's Richard Harris and Scott Leese. We are back for another episode of the Surf and Sales podcast. I was about to say the summit, but that's not for another week or two.
2 weeks left.
So for those of you who have been listening, you really need to come to the Surf and Sales event. It's a lot of fun. It's not a bro fest, we promise. It's not a drunk fest or a frat party. We promise, and the content's always awesome. Plus you get to see me attempting to surf, which is always worth the price of admission. With us today is a really good friend of ours. I've gotten to know this gentleman for the last couple of years. He's allowed me to speak at his conferences, for which I'm truly grateful. It is David Dulaney, who is the founder, CEO, entrepreneur of the Tenbound conference. I know there's two this year. So David, welcome to the show, and let everybody know just real quick where the two are and what the dates are.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, it's an honor to be on. Thank you guys for having me. And we are doing two this year. New York City is June 18th and San Francisco, back in San Francisco on August 17th.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really, really great. That's super exciting. Before we jump into that, because I do want to hear the origin story of Tenbound. Like, it's always fun, we get to hear about these things like, Unleash and Rainmaker, which is now Rev 20 and SaaSter, but we never hear the origin stories. At least I don't. So I want to get to that. But before we go there, what's David Dulaney's origin story in sales? Like, what were you, did you have a lemonade stand as a kid? What was your origin story there?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. My first like W-2 job was selling shoes at City of Shoes. And it was awesome, man. I mean, I couldn't believe that you could make, commissions on sales of shoes because everybody needs shoes, and it was all inbound, right? So
right.
It was awesome, dude.
Where were you?
Walnut Creek. So I was born in Walnut Creek. I was raised in Alamo, which is just south of Walnut Creek in the East Bay. That's
California for folks who don't know that. That's Walnut Creek, California. But
it is, yeah.
Like at the mall?
Yeah.
All I can picture right now is David dressed as Al Bundy,
totally
selling shoes.
Right.
Yeah.
All I can picture is everybody Googling who's Al Bundy.
No, it was great, but I definitely had a rebellious streak even then. I didn't get along very well with my boss, and ended up getting fired from City of Shoes for insubordination. And I remember.
All right, you got to tell that story. Stop right there. That's too good and juicy. What did you do?
Wow. So I always remember it too because they called me in for 15 minutes, and I learned a couple of times through like shitty jobs and getting fired that if your boss ever calls you in for 15 minutes, just never go back ever.
Right.
Like so yeah, I mean, dude, this is crazy, but I definitely had a little bit of a rebellious streak, and there was those mirrors on the ground where you could see the shoes, and somehow the boss had lined up the mirrors in just a way where he saw me making an obscene gesture behind his back. By lining up like 3 or 4 of those mirrors. He was very upset, and the rest is history. So,
but what did he do to make you? What did he do to make you flip him off, though? Like, was he being a dick?
Yeah. I mean, he was probably. I mean, this was way before meth was a big problem, but he was probably dabbling in. Well, I think they had meth back then in the 70s or 80s, but. He was whenever I got in with like Methheads, I wasn't good with those people.
Whenever you got like, is this a recurring theme? Are you like Scott's over here chomping at the bit, and I'm not letting him in or out, but
no, working with Methheads is tough, man. I mean, especially with me because I'm pretty impatient myself, so it's just the energy.
I didn't know Methheads gravitated to sales, but I guess
come on, Richard, it's been too long since you've been on the sales floor, my friend.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah.
I might have to get back into it. So yeah, but I mean, I loved the job. I loved being in sales, but I definitely, I mean, I realized like connecting the dots from, 40 years ago or whenever that was, that I have had a rebellious streak, and I probably should have done the entrepreneurship thing a long time before I did. but what are you going to do, man? You only have the moment, and you got to just go with what you got. So
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
How long did it take you? I mean, I can look at your resume and do the math, but like, how long did it take you really to know that you were meant to be nobody's boss and you were going to start your own thing?
no, it's interesting because uh, I think I knew it subconsciously, the whole time that I was in the corporate world, and but it was fear, really. It's a fear of being out in the wild and not knowing where your next paycheck would come from. And I literally, like, I started working at City of Shoes, I think when I was like 15, and I always had a job. I like always had a paycheck coming in ever since, 3 years ago. And it's just that fear of like not having that security blanket kept me in. But at the same time, like that kid who was like making obscene gestures to the boss, like never actually left, right? So there was always that edge that probably held me back a lot, in my corporate career. So
Do you think unconsciously there's something that might be responsible for some of the shorter stints that you had at places before you started uh, your company, before you started Tenbound?
oh yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because I never try to like blame or place blame. I think that a guy told me that the key to a successful marriage is just realize that everything is your fault, and that that's also true in life. I think if you take like full responsibility for everything, you're in way better shape. But in my defense, those last couple companies were just crap companies, and I got involved with really really bad people, and I'm pretty much driven by hatred and rage to be successful now. So it ultimately was positive.
Scott's resonating with hatred and rage. He totally gets it.
Well,
Hatred and rage can be a good motivator.
well, what's interesting to me actually is that, based on your LinkedIn profile, like you were at Achieve Global for damn near 7 years, right? I'm sure there was multiple roles that you were in there. That gets acquired. You go to Glassdoor, you're there for 2.5, almost 3 years. That gets acquired. So you have like what I would deem two really good positive experiences,
Yeah.
long-term commits and positive outcomes. And then I'm just thinking of what you said earlier about the sort of rebellious streak and whatnot. It's like you combine the rebellious streak that's already there with a couple successful stints, and I can see patience and tolerance for dealing with jerks or not being in the right environment to diminish over time. And therefore you get quicker to pull the trigger and be like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Before finally you're like, fuck this. I should do this myself. Okay? That's the part that
very astute.
makes sense to me.
Scott, you guys need to hang out more. Like I need to take both of you out for a drink. I'll buy the first.
100%.
I'll buy the first
Yeah.
3 rounds just to get the story started. Like not even one round, right?
Yeah.
'Cause
That's
you
very
guys are
astute, Scott. Yeah.
Yeah.
you guys are very similar in your style, which is also why I think it's made you successful. And to all of us, there's always something that holds us back, right? So, when were you? Just out of curiosity, when were you at Glassdoor? We had Sahil on yesterday and was talking about it. Were you with him, or were you later, or what was your?
Yeah, that was interesting. So Scott mentioned earlier in my career, I was selling sales training for about 7 years, and but it was the time of tech in the Bay Area, so I really wanted to break into tech. So I got in at Glassdoor. I think it was in 2011, so it's like going on 10 years now. And I mean, that was such an amazing experience. I started with Sahil. We shared a double wide cubicle in the office, Sausalito, and that's where I met. I mean, the people there were amazing. I met Jake Dunlap, he was my boss for a while. Doug Hall, Pat Shaw, Adam Polishevsky, like really good friends to this day. And yeah, it was an awesome experience. I just and it's like it's weird how your career goes. I live in Daly City, so I was driving up to Sausalito every day, and I counted it one day. And it was 39 stoplights between Daly City and Sausalito. And this was before the days of like working from home. So I was about to blow my brains out. So I got an offer at a company that was called OpenDNS. It became Cisco, and that was like 10 minutes away from my house. So not a lot of, forethought or planning, but it worked out pretty well.
That is
Why,
pretty good.
why the focus on sales development of all the different pieces of the sales world? You honed in on sales development. Why?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. So when I was at Glassdoor, we were still trying to figure out the sales process there, and I had predictable revenue under my arm and some printed out blog posts, and I just pitched them on setting up a sales development team. And we were still really trying to figure it out, but I for some reason it just piqued my interest. And as a sales rep for a long time before that, that was like the biggest pain point for me, was just dividing my time between prospecting and following up on leads, and then running sales calls and like doing the actual job of a salesperson. And I just thought it was an awesome opportunity. So they basically at Glassdoor were like, "Hey, dude, we'll give you a couple months, but if it's not working out, we're gonna have to figure something out." And I just like that was back before like SalesLoft and Outreach and all that, and it was just basically lead lists and Salesforce and spreadsheets and Post-it notes. And we just at first it was just me, and I just tried to find something to work. We eventually it started to work, and we built it up, and it just was super interesting to me. So and it was like the skill set was still pretty rare of running those teams and building up sales development teams. And so I just said, I'll just double down on this. So
What did you how long did it take you to quote unquote figure it out? I think is the first question. And then do you know the moment where you did figure it out? Right, where you were like, oh, when did Glassdoor say, "Okay, David, you've proven yourself"?
yeah. So dude, this is interesting. It was walking down memory lane, but so um, I started doing the job. I was the first SDR at Glassdoor, and I started to set appointments. We had an SLA. People were happy with the appointments, and then we got a new VP of sales who was more experienced. He had taken companies public and things like that, and he had familiarity with the sales development team. And I remember I went in and pitched him, with what we had done and what the potential was to hire some people to build up the program. And he agreed. And so it was just kind of like little bit of evidence and having a plan and pitching it and then being able to do it, and then just kind of built up from there.
How long did that take you?
Probably 3 months.
Okay.
And I mean, dude, this is seriously like, this is back in the day of, I had one of those carnival counters. I still have it, actually. My kids like to play with it. A little carnival counter. And I would have it on my desk and just sit there, and like every time I would make a call, I'd click it, and I'd try to get 100 calls a day. And I was like, I'm not going to leave until I click this fucking thing 100 times. That's how like archaic it was back then.
Yeah.
So
that's funny. And when did you decide to make the leap to building out your own conference? Obviously, this is kind of near and dear to our heart, having built our conference out. So when and why did you decide to turn Tenbound into a conference?
Yeah, man. So it's interesting. So I got involved with a couple of crappy companies there, and I was at a crossroads back in like 2016, and I was interviewing for other director jobs, and probably was just going to become a director of sales development somewhere. And a friend of mine was putting together his sales development program. He was the CEO of a cybersecurity company. And he's like, hey, do you know of any good SDRs? And I was like, you should actually be a little bit more strategic on how you set this up. Don't just hire some people and like stick them in the corner and have them call. And so I got a consulting gig, right? And that essentially is how Tenbound was born. Just doing playbooks and a little bit of training and stuff like that. And at some point, like a few months after that, started the podcast and started to think of like, okay, how can we build like a more sophisticated sales development community? And then it was kind of a natural progression to think about, hey, we need a sales development conference. I mean, how come there's no sales development conference? It's crazy. And I actually pitched it to a guy who was running conferences. And he was like, dude, I remember distinctly, he's like, there's just not enough juice for the squeeze. And 4 years later, I completely agree. And he's like, I don't want to do it. And I was like, well, fuck it, I'll just do it then. So yeah, we just set the date, started checking out places, and just I mean, I mainly just made a commitment to it. Yeah, it went from there.
Talk to me. I want to know.
Yeah.
You did it the opposite order as us, Richard.
Yes,
okay.
you did. I want to understand, because I think lots of people have ideas out there, right?
Yeah.
That hurdle of you making that commitment. So someone told you no. So did that rebellious streak in David kick in, and are you flipping him off with a mirror on the floor behind his back? Respectfully. And I think as entrepreneurs, we all have to sort of take that leap of faith, right? What was it?
We also got told no.
Yeah.
About our conference.
Yeah.
We have that in common.
Yep. So by someone very well known about conferences. So what was that piece in David that finally made you take this leap? And just out of curiosity, where were you in life? Were you still single? Were you married with your first kid? Like, where were you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take a step back. So I'm at that last company, and I got hired. It was awesome. I mean, I was working with a really great guy, and all cylinders, firing on all cylinders. And I got transferred to work with another guy who was just a complete nightmare. And I think, to Scott's point, like, I was at the point where I'm just like, I don't want, it was probably just ego, but I was like, dude, I don't need to explain sales development to this fucking guy. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a jackass. I'm out of here. And so I'm getting to your question. The reason that I started Tenbound was just a necessity, man. I mean, I was interviewing for jobs and I needed to make some income. And I had a consulting gig, right? Boom, done.
Yeah, but it's still, I mean, it's an investment, dude. Like, it ain't cheap for you to front that kind of money.
Yeah. So if you think of it, like, the company has two sides. One is, advisory, which is like all your training and consulting and all that stuff. And then the other side is like events and media, and all the sponsorship stuff. So, I was lucky enough to have a very supportive wife. She's working. She was able to smooth out a lot of the bumps. She still does, income-wise. And, I had no choice. So eventually it was like, you burn the ships, you're just like, and it got to the point after like a year where I can't go back and work for anybody else. It's too late. Like, there's no freaking way. I mean, just because you guys know, I mean, there's no way. So burn the ships.
I don't fully know yet.
Okay.
Oh, Scott, you're not going back. It's going to have to be something very, very cool.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I'm only 4.5 months into this whole thing. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's like, if you can survive 3 years and get to an income level that's comfortable, then you're probably never going to go back.
I'm not worried about the income level part. I'm worried about the 3 years part.
I'm like, Scott's going to sit here and go, I'm doing it in a year. I don't have 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have tomorrow. So
Yeah.
well, now.
So
Yeah.
you got to figure it out.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of advice? Because I know we've been talking a lot about your background and stuff, but I want to make sure we give some tactical things. You've
Yeah.
clearly been a part of this for a long time, the sales development world. Um, if someone's coming in to build a team today, right? What are 2 or 3 things that they should consider when they're starting to build their BDR team or SDR team?
Um, I mean, we boil it down to it's we took this from Marcus Lemonis, the guy that does the profit on whatever CNBC. You got to think of it like people, processes, and technology. In that, start with a strategy for how you're going to build the program, and then plug in the people and the processes and the technology according to the strategy that you want to put together. And the reason I say that is because 9 times out of 10, people just throw together a sales development team. They just start plugging people in. They start plugging in random processes, and then they buy some technology, and they're just like, "Hey, why is this thing not like firing on all cylinders here? What's going on?" And it's because they never took a step back to map it out and like reverse engineer the goal back from their strategy. So I mean, I would, and it's hard, it's time consuming, it's not sexy. It's hard to explain to people that don't understand sales development, but you got to do it.
When you think about the strategy side of it, like what are the 2 or 3 strategic things? If I'm a brand new company, I got some product market fit, I got 25 or 30 employees, a couple of sales reps, I want to go to this SDR route. Like,
Yeah.
what does strategy look like? What does that mean? Because that's a very good buzzword.
It's a very, it's a very good buzzword. So, I mean, we're doing this right now at Tenbound. So it's a perfect time. We have our revenue goals for each quarter. And we know that we need about 4x pipeline rolling into each quarter to hit the revenue goals. And we know that in order to hit that 4x pipeline, we need X number of appointments set every week. So that's really easy. So I could look at my calendar, and the sales guy can look at his calendar, and we got to figure out how to set enough appointments so that we have enough pipeline to hit our revenue goals and keep the pipeline at a certain level on a rolling basis. And so, okay, so we start with that goal in mind, and then reverse it back. So what do we need to do to set enough appointments each week in order to hit that pipeline goal? Okay, we need to talk to people, set enough, have enough conversations with people each week, and make enough activities happen each week to have those conversations. Okay, cool. So now we can break out the tactical activity metrics that we need to have in place in order to hit those conversation and appointment goals. Great. Okay, so who do we have in place to do that? Okay, are they the right person? Can they actually do the job? Do they have all the tools that they need? Are they trained? Have they attended, surf and sales? Like all the stuff to get them up to speed. And I can do this because I know what the revenue goal is. I know what we need to get out of the SDR organization. But if you're a new manager at a company and you come in and you're like, "Hey, boss, like, what is the revenue goal for my organization in the in sales development?" A lot of times they can't give you that answer because they've never really thought about that. So that's an issue. I mean, if you either get the revenue goal to be able to reverse engineer the strategy, or you just have to make up something.
What type of sales environment would you say is not conducive to an SDR model? Or do you believe that such a thing exists?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if it's a very relationship based, personalized, high touch, kind of old school, like playing golf and going out to dinner and like building relationships over the course of decades, then it probably is not the right fit, maybe. But if it's I mean, definitely in a SaaS type of if it's a higher velocity SaaS model, where the sales reps can do some prospecting on top tier accounts, but they really should be focused on running demos and negotiations and closing deals, then a lot of those companies, it's a good fit. Um,
Is there a revenue threshold in your mind? It's got to be a certain level of MRR, ARR.
yeah, I mean, I've heard like if it's not 10 to 12K a year, then it doesn't make sense financially. But the question I would have is, okay, so do you have a freemium model or something? Like, how are you going to get the leads and how are you going to get the conversation set up? And then are the reps, are the AEs going to be doing the prospecting and following up on the inbound leads? Because if they're not, then there's still a gap.
What what are the metrics and KPIs that you think SDR leaders should be following in companies, right? Is it still dials and email? Like, what is it? Like, there's some vanity metrics that are kind of required, so but what do you guys really pay attention to, or do you see the industry shifting towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we advocate for is conversations, the number of conversations per day, quality conversations as it's defined
How
by
do you,
the team.
yeah, how do you guys
Mhm.
define a quality conversation?
Yeah, so and I hate to give you like a consulting answer, but it really depends on what that means to the company itself. But you could put like a time threshold behind it. You could put the number of responses if it's an email situation. You could put, how many responses you get in a social situation. But that really is the key metric that we advocate for, because if you think about it, like there whatever the channel is, whether it's the phone, email, social, like smoke signals, whatever it is that drives to that conversation, those activity metrics could fluctuate quite a bit. It could take somebody like 100 phone calls to get one good conversation, or another person like two. So I think if it's early stages and you're trying to figure out what the hypothesis is for activity metrics, then you just have to pick a number for each and go with it for a while and see how it's going. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what are you trying to drive to? It's a conversation, and so that's what we're laser focused on. How many people are we actually talking to every day? And then how is that converting to an appointment? To be able to show them a demo or whatever that looks like.
What side of the fence are you on these days in terms of where SDRs should report? Should they report into sales? Should they report into marketing? Depending on who you talk to, you hear different things. So curious if you could share your feelings on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think some of the latest reports say like 70% reports to sales, and which makes perfect sense because to some extent it is a sales job. I mean, you have to be persistent and persuasive to talk to people, and you got to be out there like talking to people, getting them interested. Um, but you know, sales receives the output of the sales development team, and so they're waiting for the sales development team to produce an output, and not necessarily involved in everything that it takes to actually get that conversation or get that appointment. So what we see out there a lot is, salespeople are just like waiting for the sales development team to produce something, and they're just like, the sales development team sucks. Like I'm not getting anything. And it's like there's not a lot of mentorship and stuff like that that's supposed to be happening. It's just sort of a passive atmosphere. If you have it on the flip side, if you have it reporting to marketing, there's a lot of advantages there, right? Because you can coordinate with the campaigns, and marketing is very data driven, so you can see how things are converting based on the campaigns, and the SDRs are working in lockstep with marketing. But then on the flip side of that, there's still that silo that exists between marketing and sales. And so if the SDRs are rolling up to marketing, then they just are like lumped in with marketing. Marketing sucks. Like the SDR team sucks. So you have that negative attitude that permeates.
Just
So
out of
it's
curiosity,
yeah.
Scott and I've been bantering how marketing needs to sign up for a revenue number, right? Not MQ,
Yeah,
right? Just out of
totally.
curiosity, when you see SDR, BDR teams reporting into marketing, do you see them having to be responsible for a revenue number more often? Because I often think that if marketing wants the BDR and SDR team, that's the first place they need to sign up for a revenue number, aside from their general purpose.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like, so these departments were set up a long time ago, and they might not necessarily be right for today. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's a funnel, right? There's like the attention, and then having, you know, bringing them into the conversation, setting an appointment, and converting it to revenue. And so it's really like a revenue team. So, you know, like at Tenbound, we don't even have a sales team or a marketing team. It's just a revenue team, because why, you know, everyone's just doing a different job at different parts of the funnel.
So
Yeah.
you didn't really answer my question though.
Okay.
So is your opinion then that it should report into neither marketing or sales, that those titles and departments should just be cast aside, and we should just have one overall revenue organization? Is that where you stand?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit bleeding edge right now, unless you're starting a company, and you can do that, because the people have their titles and they have their egos, and they're people are very set in their ways, and so I think that would be a really tough conversation to have. But to your question, dude, I would say that if the head of marketing and the head of sales and the head of SDRs have a strong relationship and they're communicating well, then it's not as important where it rolls up to, because they're working in unison as a team. Where it just goes off the rails is, you know, you've got, especially like with the dinosaur type VP of sales, who are just like walking around like, what the fuck is this SDR team doing? Like, where's my pipeline? You know, it's just like, that's not going to work. So if all three of those leaders can be on the same page, that's when it works really well. No matter where it reports. So I'm not going to die on that sword, dude. I mean, if someone's looking for like easy answer,
David's been watching all the politicians on TV.
Exactly.
70% of SDR orgs.
So much for being that rebel, Scott. You know, he started out this podcast, you know, really like, I was a rebel, F you, blah, blah, blah. Now he's like, well, I'm not going to really take a side.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So
very
I used to say marketing, but it just depends, man.
What are some mistakes you could help people avoid? Right? We talk about things they can do right. We talk about where people can report. What mistakes, aside from, you know, and you talk about one of making sure you were very strategic. Well, let me ask you this question. As you were building SDR teams, what were some of the biggest mistakes you made?
Oh man, there's so many. You know, it's like the one that I think of offhand is really being able to hold people accountable. It's keeping a good relationship, but at the end of the day, if you're doing everything that you can as an SDR leader to set up a good strategy, get the team training, prioritize the data, you know, do everything that you need to be successful. I think I kind of crossed the line a lot between, you know, wanting to be friends with the people on the team versus really holding people accountable. And it's just something that I struggle with, you know, to this day, because at the end of the day, like, you got to make it happen. You know, that's John Barrow's t-shirt, right? You got to make it happen. The buck stops at the SDR or at the sales rep. You got to make it happen. And as a manager, you got to hold people accountable. So yeah, I would figure out how to do that in a way that works for your personality, but make sure that that's top of mind.
I don't feel like I really have ever had that problem. I almost have an easier time holding my friends accountable than I do strangers or just strictly work colleagues. I don't exactly know what it is, but I think I have a really high standard and a really high bar. And for those people that I care about deeply, it kills me if I don't feel like they're reaching it or keeping pace with me. And so I will push extremely hard, much harder on my friends than I will I have found, at least on people that I don't know very well, or just straight colleagues and not in the friend zone whatsoever. And then I think, and Richard can either agree or completely disagree with me on this, I think I then work extra hard to kind of repair or insure any damage that I may have done, and just kind of, let people know that once I walk away from work, like, I don't really care about all that stuff, and I'm just here to, enjoy our friendship and our relationship. So it's interesting to hear you say that that's been tough for you. I think it is tough for most people. I think that my response and reaction is probably in the minority. What do you think, Richard?
I so I think that's one of the things I admire about you, Scott, because you can sort of turn it off and on, and you can compartmentalize in that way. And yes, you do push hard, and occasionally I have to push back on you, and occasionally you push on me too. That's why I think that's why we get along so well. But I've always had a hard time holding those people accountable too. And there was this friendship thing, and I definitely had to learn that to stop being friends, right? Like to not be friends with folks at work. It was sort of, for me, I had to cut it off. Like I went to work, and then by the time Scott and I met, Scott was like the only person I really tried to quote unquote be friends with outside of the office. When I was working for Scott. Um, but that was by strategic design, because I knew that was my power, that was my limit, that was my challenge, right? And I sort of, for me, I needed that separation. I think now if I went back to it, I could be a little bit better at it. I'm a little bit older, slightly more mature, and I get it, but it's really hard, I think. I also think it's hard too, when it is your own company, because now these people are like family, right? And that probably feels the same way when it is your own sales team. It does feel a little bit like family. I also think it's harder for people who are promoted from within to start to have to redraw that line and understand that relationship, because you can't just cut it off, so to speak, right? And you don't want to, but that, you sort of have to figure that out, and nobody teaches you how to do that stuff. There's nobody who
Yeah.
teaches you how to do it. So
Yeah, I mean, if you do everything that you can as a manager to give people the tools and the processes and the training, and you just knock yourself out, and then you got to hold them accountable. The other thing you made me think of, you guys, that I would definitely, I definitely learn, and like the hard way is, you can't do everything. You can't be everything to the job, and the sales development manager job it's a combination of art and science, and I see a lot of the people that I talk to out, they're trying to do everything. So they're trying to be like this sales development scientist with all the numbers and everything, but yet teach the art of persuasion and the art of sales skills and stuff like that. And they're trying to manage up to the VPs and do all that, right? And they're trying to be operations, and it's just like, especially um, as I got out of in the corporate world, it's like you're expected to do everything like that, because that's why they hired you. But when you go the entrepreneurial route, you realize pretty freaking quickly, like you cannot do everything. You have to delegate, and you have to be able to focus on your strengths, and like have other people do things that they're strong in. And it's looking back, it's like I tell SDR managers, like, hey, there's things that you're good at in the SDR manager job. Double down on those, get really, really good on those, and try to get support for the stuff that you suck at, because you suck at it. So that was interesting.
That's good. That's good advice. I can remember somebody, at one point in time, I was debating what to do with my career and whether to kind of diversify it and try different things out. And somebody said to me, "You're really good at this one thing. Why do you want to mess with that and try to learn this other thing? Just like go all in and be like the guy for X." And I'm glad I got that feedback when I did, and I feel like I've tried to do that. So that advice and feedback that you just gave resonates with me a lot.
Yeah, one of the thought leader guru type of people that I follow is named Dan Sullivan, and he runs a company called Strategic Coach, and he talks about this concept of like your unique ability. You know, everyone's got some kind of unique ability. Everyone's got some kind of superpower. And, you know, when we're coming up in school, it's like you have to get all A's in everything. You've got to be completely well-rounded. You got to do everything yourself. And they're basically creating a great, you know, highly skilled employee. But when you go out into the entrepreneurial world, it's like, dude, you realize pretty quick that you suck at like 90% of things, and you got to focus in on your unique ability, what you do really, really well, and then find really competent people to help you with the other stuff. And I think that you can bring that in to the corporate world as an SDR manager. Just figure out what you're really good at. And
well, I think part of the role of the SDR manager is to recognize and develop somebody else's unique ability.
Yeah.
And point it out to them, and help them become more self-aware, so they can also focus on the right thing that they're good at, you know.
Yeah.
So
100%. I mean, it's like, and that's what's cool about some of the companies that use the SDR program as like a feeder, and then you do it for a couple of years, and then you can go to different parts of the business, like Salesforce and LinkedIn, and some of the bigger companies that offer that are great about that, because they just get super bright people who are hardworking, perseverant, and they aren't 100% set on their career, and they end up staying at those companies for like 5 years because they offer them different opportunities within the company to find that unique ability and grow it. So, you know, I would say if someone's out there right now, like thinking about this, what do you enjoy doing? What would you do if you weren't getting paid? And you know, but it's got to be something commercial, because you can't just surf all day, and unless you're really good, or you
unless
can
you're
have a
really
side
good,
business.
unless
So it's
you're
got to be
really,
something commercial. I mean, you
yeah.
know, right?
I don't know. We've talked about, you know, the fantasy is to move to Costa Rica doing, you know, this kind of, you could go run this business from Costa Rica, David. You don't need to be in America, you know, like you could
Yeah.
down there.
Yeah, dude. I mean, surf
Okay.
and sales like is it's such an amazing event, and what you guys have done. I mean, how did you, um, if you don't mind me asking, like, how did you come up with this, and what's your game plan for surf and sales?
Came up with it basically on a family vacation. Richard and I both took our families to Costa Rica for an unconventional Thanksgiving, and
Nice.
we're just sort of talking about his business, and how I'm always giving Richard shit about how much he has to travel and he has to go to all these shows and everything. And I think he kind of likes it secretly. I loathe that stuff. It's really hard on me physically, and so
I like it. I won't argue
yeah.
that. I do like it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was sort of saying
Good
like,
mix
hey
it up.
man, you know, have fun in St. Louis at whatever in the Marriott for the 100th time. And we were in the water in Costa Rica, and I'm like, how come nobody has a conference here in like a
Gosh.
beautiful tropical location that people actually want to go to? No
Yeah.
disrespect to the citizens of St. Louis, hopefully. And you know, I don't actually know the size of Tenbound conference, but like, I don't want to go to a conference where there's 100,000 people like at Dreamforce running around, and there's 100+ vendors trying to sell something, and the connections and the humanity just sucked out of it. I meet people for 45 seconds at a time. And there's a big focus on like going to this after party and this. Dude, I don't want to deal with all that shit. Okay. I want to go have conversations that mean something, and that it's just a totally different kind of intimate experience. And so we decided to do Costa Rica because we'd been there a few times. We decided to keep the numbers really small to protect that intimacy. And that's kind of how it was born. It was just like, fuck it, let's go for it. And we booked stuff and kind of had no idea what to expect. I'll let Richard kind of talk about the plans as they are now and moving forward, but that was like the origin of it.
Yeah. The plan. Yeah, that's the true origin story. And, I've said it before. Scott's always the one who's like, why don't we do this? And I'm always the one who's like, well, go fucking do it. Let's do it. So, Scott always
And then
needs a
we
little,
ended up doing it.
right. And so he ends up doing it. And we have a lifelong friend of Scott, and someone who's become a good friend, Jeff Coleman, who's very good at this stuff too. And so he helps us. He does a lot of the legwork. Moving forward, the goal is to do 2, 3, maybe 4 of these a year, 1 a quarter. We're also talking to a couple of companies where they're like, hey, we want to do one where it's just our employees. We got a big sales team and we're going to take our top whatever or top managers and do just a management focus. We've also talked about doing one with, with C levels only or VPs of sales only. So we've got a lot of ideas, and a lot of interest from different folks. And I think the challenge we have is time, right? Like just sort of, we all have to run our own business, and we all have kids, and we all have to sort of, make it work. But we'll be changing location for the September one this year. So that'll be, are we announcing it, Scott?
Yeah, I've told people we're going to far south of Mexico on the Pacific side.
Oh, wow.
Southern Mexico.
That's amazing.
Sales 5 September.
Yeah.
So that'll be a lot of fun. That'll be in September. It usually happens, won't know for sure, but it's usually like that weekend after Labor Day weekend. So people start, marking your calendar and emailing us and asking. And anybody who emails me at from this episode with David Dulaney, I'll give you $500 off if you come in September. So there it is.
Nice.
There's my Easter egg.
That's excellent.
That's out of Richard's take.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very bullish on events. I mean, live events are great for me because I think people are working remotely more, and there's just not that much human connection. And so having small events and medium and large events, I mean, anytime. I'm lucky because I live in San Francisco. So I can, go to an event every day if I want to. But you make some of the, I met Richard. I met you actually at Dreamforce, like a long time ago. We were with Max from Sales Hacker, and I met you there initially. I met Scott at Rainmaker. So I love events. I mean, obviously, we all put them on, but I just think they're.
When you come to ours, you keep promising me. What note do I need to write to your wife? Because I don't think it's a work thing.
Well, he could say the same thing to me. When am I going to his?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a dream of mine to someday go to Surf and Sales, and I want to make that a reality.
Scott, if we got a nickel for every time someone said, "I really want to come to this," we'd have like 7 or 8 nickels.
You know what you guys could do is, there's a good surf beach in Pacifica.
Oh, dude, come on. There's like 1,000 people at that beach every single day.
But, I mean, you got the training.
It would also absolutely destroy the margins, because trying to rent a property somewhere in the Pacifica, Montera, or Ocean Beach area would just ruin the whole thing. But yeah, there are places in California where it is possible to pull off. I don't agree with that.
San Onofre, you can rent out the nuclear power plant for the training, and
I'll just tell everybody that all the sharks in the water are just dolphins.
I love it though. I think it's great.
What can we do to help you, David? If anything, we always try to offer our advice or our help in any way at the end of every episode to our guests. So want to make sure that,
I appreciate that.
We throw that out there to you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. No, I would just encourage everybody to go to tenbound.com and jump on the newsletter. I mean, that's kind of the best way to keep in touch on everything that we're working on. We're always releasing new research papers and blog posts and podcasts and events, and the newsletter is the way to go. So you just head over to tenbound.com and jump on the newsletter, and we'll keep you posted on everything we're doing.
Great.
Cool. Well, sorry for the saw background. If you can hear that, that's construction in my house.
I appreciate it. This was a great conversation, you guys, and I would encourage everybody. And like I said, it's my dream, but everybody on this should go to Surf and Sales. I mean, I've heard great things about it, and I plan to be there one of these days. So
appreciate that, David.
Thank you.
Enjoy spending time with you, man, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye, David.